Hi, everyone, and welcome to Hub Chat Health. Today, we are discussing how to make your own salves, balms, and tinctures. Wow, this is going to be a fabulous discussion. It's great to welcome our special guest today, Danna Gesellchen. It's so lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much, Renee. It's good to be here.
Fabulous. Danna, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I can. Of course, I'm in America. I was born and raised in the southeastern part of America. I was not born into the faith that I am now. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist now, but I became a Seventh-day Adventist in my early 20s, shortly after I had finished my nurse's training. And even while I was doing the nurse's training, I had an appreciation for natural stuff. You know, I always kind of considered myself a nature lover and a lover of simplicity. And after I had completed my nurse's training, I also went to a medical missionary school not far from where I grew up called Uchee Pines Institute. And I took the training there, and I traveled with one of the founding physicians, which was Dr. Agatha Thrash, for a while, and then moved on to other things and just kept studying, eventually got into wildcrafting and learning how to find edibles and medicinals out in nature, which has become a love of mine. I'll also add this: I'm married to my husband, Danna Gesellchen, and he's my best friend.
Oh, that's lovely. And isn't it nice that you can call him your best friend? That's
Amen.
nice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Look, Hub Chat family, if you have any questions or comments and you want to send them in, you can send them into hubchatquestions@gmail.com. Before we start our discussion today, I'm going to open with a prayer. So I'm just going to ask that we all bow our heads and close our eyes.
Amen.
Our Father God in heaven, we just want to thank you and praise you that you are such an amazing God, that you have created us, but you've also created nature around us. And we can find ways to heal ourselves in this wonderful creation of nature. God, I just ask that you be with our discussion today as Danna shares with us some things that she has learned. Please, God, just give us the clarity, give us the right words so that we can share the messages that you want us to share. We just ask this now in your name. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
So, Danna, let's start this discussion here. Why is there a need for practical healthcare preparation?
That's a big question, Renee. As an RN, a registered nurse, I have seen quite a bit. I worked in hospital nursing. I've seen things that actually were worsened by medicines and natural interventions. I just had a case recently where a lady reached out online on a Facebook platform asking for help because her husband had been bitten by a brown recluse spider bite. And I don't know if you have brown recluse spiders in New Zealand. Well, here in America, we do. And basically what happens when a brown recluse bites you is you have massive tissue death. And the intervention that is done in hospitals is basically just surgical excision. They just cut out all of the damaged tissue. Well, this lady reached out to me on Facebook, and I shared with her very specific herbs to use and a very specific treatment to use. And she did that. And in 3 days, her husband was completely well. And so it's in my mind, I know that allopathic medicine has its place, but I think that the place is a lot further out from us than most of us allow. We need to learn these things because I believe, based on the scriptures, that we're coming into some times that are going to be very difficult. And if you know how to go out in your yard and find medicine, it's a lot safer.
Absolutely. Is it important to be prepared? You talked about there is a time coming that we're going to need to go out into nature. and to be able to heal ourselves through nature. Can we just talk about that a little bit? I know that we're going to get you back for a second part to discuss this further, but let's just talk about that. Is it important to be prepared and know how to make our own salves and balms and tinctures? And if so, why?
If, according to the scriptures, and I do believe in the scriptures, if we choose to be faithful to God, there are many of us, according to the scriptures in the book of Revelation, it says that those who are faithful to the Lord in the end time will not be able to buy or sell. And if you cannot buy or sell, you're not going to be able to go to the physician. You're not going to be able to buy medications. But if you can walk out your yard and find your medicine growing on the ground, then why be unsure? Why be afraid? You know, you have everything that you need all around you if you know how to utilize it.
So let's actually look at how to make our own salves, balms, and tinctures.
Okay, let's do it. We are actually told in the Bible speaks much about being prepared. You know, the wise man foresees evil coming and hideth himself, but the foolish pass on and are punished. And so we need to understand we're coming from a biblical perspective. And I also believe in the writings of Ellen White. I'm going to share with you some other passages that she wrote over 150 years ago. She was well ahead of her time. Revelation 22:2 says, in the midst of the street of it, and on either side of the river, was the tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, and yielded her fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. And I know that this is speaking of, you know, the tree of life in heaven, but we see many examples in the scriptures, and we'll cover a few of them, where the leaves of the tree truly were for the healing of the nations. This is taken from a book called Volume 2, Selected Messages. It says a cup of tea made from catnip herb will quiet the nerves. So if you're anxious and nervous, try some catnip. Hop tea will induce sleep. Hop poultices over the stomach will relieve pain. Here's another. This is God's methods. The herbs that grow for the benefit of man, and a little handful of herbs kept and steeped and used for sudden ailments have served tenfold, yes, 100-fold better purposes than all the drugs hidden under mysterious names and dealt out to the sick. And that's another point. You know, the herbs do have Latin names, and the reason for that is so that whether you're in America or New Zealand, if we're going by the local name of a plant, you know, calendula or comfrey or something like that, you may call it by a different name than I do, and yet we're talking about the same plant. So it is important to know the Latin name. I don't often use that when I'm speaking to people in America, because most people here pretty much use the same names, the common names. But it's not the same as these big long. I mean, you've seen medications, and it's huge. You can't even pronounce the words that these things are made out of.
I love the point that you had there, Dana. You made the point about in your previous slide about catnip, and about and that it helps you to calm your nerves. You know, we live in a time where there's so much fear and anxiety and uncertainty. So maybe we're all going to have to go out and get some catnip and put it in our hot water and have a tea of catnip, a catnip tea.
Yes, add some oat straw.
Okay.
Oat straw is very good for anxiety as well.
Fabulous.
Okay, I'm just going to forward through some of these because I do want to get to the point of making these things. Here is, you know, this talks about the poultice of figs that Hezekiah was told to lay on his boil. I did some research on figs one time, and I thought it was interesting because figs contain a substance called benzaldehyde. And it has been suggested by some people that the boil that Hezekiah had was actually a cancerous tumor. And benzaldehyde has been shown to actually break down cancerous tumors. So that's just a little interesting point there. Here is mentioned pulverized charcoal, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, mixed with flaxseed. Flaxseed in and of itself has some drawing power along with the charcoal.
I have to say that charcoal probably one of my favorite poultices to go to, besides the
Yes,
potato poultice. I use it all the time, charcoal, all
yes.
the time. It's absolutely
Ye-
brilliant. And we'll talk about that further, maybe not today, but we'll talk about it in an upcoming session.
Okay, sure. Um, this next bullet point here, the second one on this page, according to the United States Food and Drug Administration, 100,000 Americans die from reactions to prescription drugs each year. This was taken from an official site, and I have actually heard that number is 2.5 times that. So it's, instead of 100,000, it's more like 250,000 people every year that die from their prescription medications. When I was still in nursing, I myself made a medication error one time, and I wrote myself up, and I knew that my colleagues were making mistakes too. And so it's not nearly as uncommon as people might think. So here's another another issue is the overuse of antibiotics. We hear of MRSA, VRSA, all these superbugs that are coming in now that no antibiotic can touch. Well, we'll talk about this in just a minute, but there are so many herbs that contain substances that these powerful bacteria cannot resist. And it's because they don't contain just one component like these antibiotics do. You know, an antibiotic is just one thing, or maybe a combination of two things that's going to go after this bacteria, whereas an herb may have hundreds of different components that are affecting this bacteria in completely different ways. And there's no way that a bacteria can adapt enough to handle all of this arsenal that's coming after it at the same time. So the herbs are much more powerful than antibiotics and the drugs. And the last one here on this page is antibiotics are not specific. They kill the good gut bacteria as well as the bad gut bacteria. So, you know, often people that take antibiotics, they end up with gastrointestinal issues and have to take a probiotic or something like that. Herbs are not going to, they don't have that effect. Okay, let's get into some making. Is it okay if we do a little bit of terminology just so we're all kind of on the same page?
Sounds great.
Okay, in this particular presentation, I talked about making creams and salves, tinctures and extracts, and we'll talk about the difference between tinctures and extracts in just a minute. But a cream is a mixture of oil and water with whatever other ingredient you want to put in there. So you do have water in there. We'll talk about why this is important to remember in just a minute. A decoction, this is basically herb tea. Okay, you just simmer it in water for a little bit. An extract is a glycerin extraction. It's the menstruum, which we'll talk about what that word is in just a minute, or the liquid part of this extract is glycerin. Okay, and the glycerin, the purpose of it is to dissolve the active components in the plant material. An infusion is a preparation of herbs with hot water steeped. Again, this is herb tea. The difference here is a decoction is actually kept on the heat and simmered for a short time, and that's mostly the roots and barks and things that are harder, but the herbal infusion is typically used for leaves and things that are not as hard, and they don't have to be actually boiled or simmered at all. They can just steep. An infused oil is an herbal preparation with a carrier oil, and they typically must macerate, or that just simply means sit in the oil for a while to break down the active ingredients in the plant matter.
Can I just ask a question there with your infused oils? So regarding your carrier oil, what carrier oil do you use?
The favorite of most herbalists is like jojoba or sweet almond oil, but I have used extensively olive oil with good results. You have to be careful because the olive oil, I think, can go rancid a little more quickly. And it has, I think the biggest thing is it tends to have more of a scent and odor than the other oils. So that's the best way. But I use olive oil a lot. But typically my salves and stuff don't sit around very long. They get used, so it's not going to be an issue. Okay, and then maceration here, I have the definition: the process of allowing herbs to sit in a menstruum for a period of time. and we'll learn what menstruum is in just a minute. The mark is the plant material, the actual herb itself. That's your mark. And then the menstruum is the solvent, whether it's alcohol or glycerin or oil or what have you. So that's the menstruum.
Right.
Okay. Percolation is not a process that I really use. That's just basically where you let it's like you have a container with a funnel and some kind of strainer in it, and you put the herb in the funnel, and then you just pour the menstruum over and let it slowly drip through. That's not a method that I really use. A lot of people like that method, but I don't particularly care for it. A salve is a semi-solid medicinal ointment prepared by combining an herb-infused oil with beeswax. The beeswax, if you add a lot of beeswax, it's going to be a very stiff salve. If you add just a little, then it'll be, thinner, a little bit more creamy. A tincture is an herbal extract typically using alcohol as the menstruum.
Dana, we've had a lot of questions about tinctures, so I'm pleased we're talking about this because many people have said, tinctures, they have the base, the menstruum, as an alcohol. But we're not supposed to, as Christians, defile our body by taking alcohol, using alcohol. So I'm pleased that we're going to discuss this today. Let's talk about using alcohol.
Okay, let's go ahead and address that because it's a very, I believe, important question, and it's one that I think that we, if I can say it this way, we kind of beat ourselves up over. Glycerin is an alcohol. So many people go to the glycerin extracts to avoid alcohol, whether it's vodka or Everclear or whatever. But it's kind of like the man in the Bible that was trying to run from the bear and he came inside and got bitten by the snake or whatever, and it's just not, you're not going to escape alcohol by going to glycerin. The simplest way to take an herb is just to eat it. Just take a spoonful of powder and put it in water and drink it or whatever. And because the herb is the medicine. Now, the reason that I prefer actually the alcohol tinctures as opposed to the glycerin extracts, there's several reasons. The main reason is because alcohol tinctures are going to last a lot longer, and they tend to extract the medicinal properties better. The glycerin extract is a little weaker. It's not going to extract quite as much. Neither does it have the same shelf life as an alcohol tincture. Now, if you use an alcohol tincture, what I like to do is I will put, whether I'm taking a half a dropper or a whole dropper full, I'll put it in a mug and I will pour hot water over it. If you let that sit within the first 5 minutes, 95% of the alcohol has evaporated. Will you get all of the alcohol out? No, you will not. But if you evaporate it that way by putting the hot water over the herb, the amount of alcohol that you get is equivalent to about what you would get if you eat a ripe banana. And so if we're going to be that particular, then we need to be very careful not to eat ripe bananas. So that's my understanding of it right now. I've studied it quite a bit. And so this is where I'm at with this. And so we're going to talk a little bit about percentages and how much percentage of glycerin it takes to actually preserve an herb. And several times I have used the recommended percentage of glycerin and had my entire batch spoil and mold because it just was not a high enough percentage of glycerin to preserve it. And so I dislike working with glycerin, but I do it because I do have many people. I respect everyone's choice and I respect everyone's conscience. I don't want to hurt anyone's conscience. So when I was more active in making tinctures and glycerites, I definitely made both available for people.
Right. Well, I think that helps to alleviate some of our questions. And I would say it's really important to do your own research and go and do your
Yes,
own learning, your own study into this.
yes, it is. And I encourage people to do that whenever I give a talk on anything. So, okay. When you make a tincture, which let me just cover this point as well, you cannot technically call um, a glycerin extract a tincture because it's not, by definition, a tincture is an alcohol extract. You can call a tincture an alcohol-based tincture an extract because it is. It's alcohol is used to extract the medicinal properties from the herbs, but you cannot call a glycerin extract a tincture. That's not technically correct. So to make a tincture, you have to use alcohol, and it's typically 40% alcohol that's used. However, that's for like leaves and herbs, the softer part of a plant. If you're using barks and roots, things that are tougher, you may have to go up to a 50%. And most people that make tinctures just use vodka, either 40% or 50% alcohol vodka. I don't do that, and I use a product called Extractahol because it's made from cane alcohol, and the reason I use that is because I work with a lot of people that are gluten intolerant, and since it's a cane alcohol, it can be used by anybody. So, okay. So moving on, this is just a kind of an example. I don't know. Do you have burdock? Do you know if you have burdock in New Zealand? You do have burdock. This would be roughly how you would make an alcohol tincture. So if anybody wants to take a screenshot of that, that will give you an idea. Basically, you want 5 cups of your menstruum, which is the liquid, to 1 cup of mark. Now, I don't use the measurement of weight system. I use what's called the folk system. So I don't get into a lot of fine calculations. You know, I need 2.19999 grams of the herb. That's kind of silly to me. So, okay, to make an extract or a glycerite, here's that percentage that I was mentioning earlier. You need 60% glycerin in order to properly extract as well as preserve. But as I said, I've had 60% spoil. So I always, personally, whenever I make any kind of glycerin extract, I always use a minimum of 75% glycerin. So it'll be 75% glycerin and 25% purified water. And then, you know, add it to my herb. So.
That's a good tip to know.
Yes, yes, it's, you know, I don't despise glycerin. I do use it, and it's a lot easier to get kids to take herbs with a glycerin extract because it's very sweet. But I really don't care for that icky sweet flavor. Me personally, I don't like really, really sweet stuff. So it is a little harder, but you can put it in water and dilute that a little bit. Let's talk about salves just a little bit. With a salve, basically what you do is you take, you know, we talked about the different oils. Jojoba is a favorite. I have used sweet almond oil. I have used avocado oil. I've used olive oil. I've never used just straight coconut oil because, you know, of course it gets thick at room temperature. But you want to, a lot of people will heat this, but I like to use the time method where you put your herb in your oil for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, something like that. And that allows the oil to pull out the medicinal properties. And then I'll strain that. And here again, you know, I typically use the 5-to-1, 4-to-1 ratio of oil and herb. Sometimes I'll use more if I want it to be a really strong salve. It just kind of depends. I just sort of play with it. But when you strain the mark out of the menstruum, which would be the oil in this case, then you take that strained oil and you're going to add like 4 parts. So if you have, now I'm in America, we use cups. If I had 4 cups of oil, I would add 1 cup of beeswax. And that's going to give a nice, fairly stiff salve that breaks fairly easily, that's not going to hurt if somebody rubs it on a scrape that I got or a wound. So you want one that's not too hard. So 4 to 1, 5 to 1 if you want a little softer oil, softer salve. Now, this is an important point right here where it says no preservative is required for salves. You can add essential oils either for fragrance, or if it's got some medicinal value, you can add a fragrance, but you don't need any kind of preservative because there's no water in that. Now, creams are a little bit different. This is a good point. Before I go to the creams, let me make this point. I'm glad I saw this here, but it's typically best to at least wilt your herbs. If you're not using dried herbs that you bought from an herb store or something, if you've gone out and, say, gathered some wild lettuce or comfrey or whatever, and you're going to make a salve out of it, because of the water content in those herbs, it can make your oil go rancid. So you want to make sure that you at least wilt. And I like to just let them sit around for at least 24 hours, not in the sun. If you're going to try to dry them a little bit in the sun, you want to have them like in a paper sack or something so that the UV light doesn't destroy any of the medicinal properties in the herb. So, at least 24 hours is what I like to do, and that will preserve your oil from going rancid.
Just on that point, so what's your thought on dehydrating so using a dehydrator to dehydrate your herb prior to putting it in your menstruum?
I think it's a good idea, especially if you're not going to make your salve right away. It's a very good idea. You just have to be careful. I think that some people actually use a temperature as low as like 90, 95 degrees Fahrenheit. I usually go between 100 and 105 Fahrenheit, and I don't know what that is in centigrade. Forgive us Americans. We only know the empirical system. Excuse me.
It's okay. We can figure out the conversion.
Okay. Now, this is an important point. I have a video on our YouTube channel on how to make your own lotion. And that was when I was first learning how to make lotion, and I didn't realize this about adding when you add water or even something like aloe vera to a cream or lotion like that, it can tend to mold. And I left it out on the counter, and when I opened it a couple weeks later to use it, it was full of mold. And so when you make a cream that has any kind of water in it, you have to have some sort of preservative. And even then, I probably would keep it in the refrigerator.
Okay. So with that, you said there, I could just have a look, if you go back to that slide there, it's talking about a preservative that is needed to make sure that it doesn't mold. Do you recommend any preservatives in particular?
Because I just stopped making creams, because I kind of got it into the wild crafting and stuff, and I sort of found another love. I've not really experimented with a lot, but some of the ones that I have heard of are sodium benzoate, which I do have some of that, but I never used it, because I just moved on to making other things. And then, as it says here, some sort of acid or alcohol is often used in these creams. I don't really like the idea of using acids or alcohols in anything that I put on my skin, but apparently it's very common. So, because whenever I learned that it needed a preservative, I just stopped making them. I did use vitamin E, but I didn't find that the vitamin E alone would stop the molding process. It may have, given it a little bit more shelf life, but it wouldn't stop it. So,
right.
Okay. Let's talk about wound care. This is one of my loves. I know that sounds kind of creepy, but I love wound care. Let's look at again some terminology here. Biofilm is a film made by planktonic bacteria, which protects the bacteria from antibiotics. It's kind of like a shield that the little bacteria put up. And we all know what biofilm is. If you've ever taken the stopper out of your dish drain and felt the bottom of it and it's slick and slimy feeling, that is biofilm. That's a bacterial biofilm, and you need to wash it. So anyway, that just gives you an idea. And bacteria will do this inside the body. They'll do this on a wound. And so anytime you deal with any kind of wound care, issue, you've got to address biofilm. Of course, bacteria is an infectious agent. Wound proliferation is the growth of new granulation, that's good, healthy tissue in a wound bed. Exudate is any kind of drainage from a wound, whether it's just the clear fluid, whether it's blood, whether it's pus, what have you. Slough is the byproduct of the inflammatory phase of wound healing, and that it contains these components here: from leukocytes, dead and living cells, microorganisms, proteinaceous material. Now, anytime you're looking at dealing with a wound, you have to address these three components. You have to address the biofilm. So ask yourself the question, what herbs will help to break down biofilm? Put one of those in there. And then you ask the question, what herbs are good to kill bacteria? Put one or two of those in there. What herbs can help this wound to heal? Put one of those in there. Now, there are some herbs that you don't want necessarily to put something that's going to seal a wound prematurely, because you could seal in some bacteria. And I can give some examples on that. One is like if you have an animal bite, cat bite, dog bite, what have you, and you have a deep puncture wound, you don't necessarily want to seal that up. You absolutely don't want to seal that up on the outside until you've dealt with the healing that needs to take place inside that wound. Because if you seal off the outside, and I have a personal investment in this, because I had a cat that scratched me very deeply on the heel of my hand, and I washed it and I went and put pine sap on it, and that sealed it up. And I sealed some Clostridium tetani bacteria into that wound, and I got tetanus. So any kind of animal injury, you want to be very careful about sealing it up.
So just going back to that thought there, Danna, so what should have you done?
With the cat scratch? Well, what I had done the other two times that I got bitten, once by a cat, once by a dog, I took a big bucket, or in the case of my arm where the dog bit me, I had a big, like a bread making bowl, and I filled it full as full as I could of hot water, as hot as I could stand. And I put about a third to a half cup of activated charcoal powder in there. And I went back and forth with my arm. Now, I had already started getting red streaks up my arm, which is very dangerous. You know, if I'd have gone to the hospital, they may have admitted me for IV antibiotics, but I never went to the hospital, and I didn't need to, because I knew that I could handle this at home. So back and forth with this charcoal, from the hot charcoal water to cold water, you're doing two things with that. You're creating a pumping effect with the hot is dilating your blood vessels, the cold is constricting. And then you have the activated charcoal in there. So as this blood is being pumped through this area, it's exposed to the activated charcoal powder, which is pulling toxins out. When I started doing this with the infected dog bite, after the first couple of treatments, the red streak was completely gone. So that's what I should have done when the cat scratched me, instead of just sealing it up. I should have just done that back and forth hot and cold treatment with the charcoal. That is a very powerful treatment, a very powerful. Anytime you have an infected wound, if at all possible, that you can use this hot and cold contrast with the charcoal in the hot, it's going to be to your advantage. So,
isn't it amazing that God has given us the most simple thing of water?
It is.
And it is, I always tell my children, it's God's medicine.
Amen.
So we've got to put all scrapes, burns, scratches, everything under the water to wash it, to get it clean. And then I always do that hot and cold treatment as well, with something like colloidal silver, or it could be with charcoal, or or whatever it is that I can find.
Is another good one. Yes, very, very good. Just this morning, I did a little Facebook Live video. We burned some brush yesterday, and this morning there's this huge mound of ashes, and it's still very hot. And I took the shovel and I pulled the ashes off. I knew what I would find. We call them clinkers, the little pieces of black burned up wood. And that is charcoal. It's not activated charcoal. Activated means it's usually steam, but they do some acid production of activated charcoal too, but you will have to use more of these little clinkers from a wood fire because it's not activated, but that will work. And it's been exposed to this who knows how hot temperature, so there's no bacteria on it. It's sterile. So I could just go out there and pick up a piece and eat that. And if I had some kind of stomach upset or what have you, it would help with that. And so that's something that, as we look forward to the time when we may have to provide for ourselves and we can't buy, can't sell, whatever, that's a way that we can get some charcoal to use in these wounds and stuff. Just get the little pieces and after a campfire and grind them up, and you have your charcoal powder.
And that's such a good question. We received a couple of questions here at HubChat regarding how to make, can we do a session on how to make our own activated charcoal or our own charcoal and the benefits of charcoal. And I know that you've done some presentations on this as well. And it's one of my big go-tos. I always go to charcoal when we've got stomach upset or there's some sort of infection, or sometimes I even use it as a face cleanser. I mean, I use it for everything. I use it for all sorts of different things. So I love charcoal. So maybe we can get you back on. We can talk about charcoal.
Sure. Yes. I really would like to address a couple of the next few slides, because I think it's important in looking at wound care, because we need to think about, if I can't go to the doctor and get my wound sewn up, if I'm cut badly, what would I do? How would I deal with that? It's actually not as hard as many people think. Here, and I get a little bit technical here, and I don't have to, but some herbs contain a substance that interferes with how bacteria communicate. And I'll just tell you, there's a system that bacteria use to communicate so that they all do the same thing at the same time. It's called quorum sensing. And there are herbs that contain this bicolin, as you see in the slide there. And bicolin interferes with that. It's kind of like it short circuits their communication network. And these herbs that are listed here are good for that. That biofilm is one of the ways that scientists think that the bacteria use the biofilm, that somehow it's connected, and that's how the bacteria communicate. Well, these herbs here that are listed, rosemary, chamomile, thyme, Oregon grape, peppermint, wonderful. All these herbs interfere, they short circuit that communication network. And if you look at soldiers in the Army, one of the things that the Army wants to do to the enemy is mess up their communication, because then they can't be coordinated in their efforts. And so if we can mess up the communication of the bacteria, we certainly can interfere with their harmful effect. And then there are herbs that contain, we'll just call it 5-MHC. There are certain, like the MRSA, you can see there, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. This is one of the really bad bugs that shuts down entire units in the hospital. And what makes these bacteria so dangerous is that they have what's called an efflux pump. Efflux pump is basically when say an antibiotic comes to a cell and is taken in, the bacteria is already there and is set up shop, and he basically spits out the antibiotic. And then if that wasn't sinister enough, he actually converts the antibiotic into food for himself. So these bacteria are very difficult to fight. But this 5-MHC, which many of our herbs have, inhibits the bacteria's ability for that pump to operate, that pumps out the antibiotic. So again, Oregon grape, cayenne, golden seal, oregano, sage, thyme, usnea, calendula, yarrow. And you'll notice that some herbs show up on the list repeatedly. So those are very important ones to consider. And then we want to address wound healing. Here you want to look at something that will pull the tissues together, that's something that's astringent, something that's soothing. Marshmallow is a very good one if you have a wound that some of tissue maybe looks like it might die, if you put marshmallow in your wound powder, not only is it very soothing to the tissues, but it will actually, as it were, draw a line in the sand between which tissues are going to live and which are going to die. In other words, if this is not going to survive, it basically sections that up. That's not going to make it. I'm going to work on this. And so marshmallow is a very powerful wound herb to use. And of course, comfrey. I have so many stories. I have a friend about that cut 2 of his fingertips off down to the bone. And I gave him comfrey to use on that. And in 3 weeks, his fingertips had regrown. In 3 weeks, he was playing the guitar again. I hope to interview him on our channel again, our YouTube channel. Yes.
That is amazing, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Comfrey is a very powerful remedy. So here would be a sample wound powder that you could use. In New Zealand, you almost would have to have usnea. That's a picture of usnea in this slide. Okay, that is a powerful, powerful remedy. Everybody needs to learn how to use usnea. So this would be a very powerful wound powder that you could mix these herbs together, grind them up, mix them together, and that would be a very effective wound. And wound powder, what I would do with this is I would take this powder, and I have some of it in my herb room over there now. I would take, say, a tablespoon of it, mix it with enough honey to make a thick paste. Bacteria can't grow in the presence of honey. Make it to a thick paste and just pack it right in the wound and then cover the wound like with a light gauze or something. That is such a powerful treatment right there.
So with this one here, you're saying make it into a powder. So you're saying once you've got your yarrow, which we have yarrow and we have pretty much all these things. We do have burdock here in New Zealand. We have all of these things here in New Zealand. So you're saying dehydrate them or dry them and then crush them up into a powder and then add it with just something like honey.
Yeah. Right. Okay. And the beauty of all of these is all of these can be taken internally. So if you had something going on internally, you could use this internally. Let's say you had a bleeding ulcer or something like that. You could use this internally. The yarrow is going to help stop any bleeding. This is going to help stop any infection, this Oregon grape. Aloe, of course, is very soothing, another antiviral antibiotic. The Oregon grape root and leaf have slightly different properties, but they both contain bicolin, so they're going to, really fight against the bacteria. And then burdock is really good for burns. The burdock leaf, the entire plant is very medicinal and also edible.
So let me just ask here, could you turn this here, if you were to add it with some oil and some beeswax, could you turn it into something like a salve? A salve?
Absolutely, yeah. That would actually be a very good salve. In fact, in my boo-boo balm that I make, I have yarrow, comfrey, and
usnea, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, usnea, yeah. And so absolutely you could, this would be a great salve. So, you could take, mix this all up and take, say, a cup of that and put it in a big container and add 4 cups of oil or 5 and let it sit and then strain it, add your beeswax and, warm it enough just to melt the beeswax, and then you've got a salve.
Do you think you'd need to leave these to sit in the oil for a while? How would you do that?
Let me bring this up. I like to let my herbs sit unheated in the oil for 4 to 6 weeks, but you can put it in a very, if you have a crock pot that has a very low setting, like warm or something like that, you can hasten that process. But, you have to run your crock pot for, a day or 2, and actually pull the medicinal properties out of the herbs into the oil by heat. But anytime I can avoid heating my herbs too much, I like to. And even when I have to heat it up in order to melt the beeswax, I try not to heat it up very much. Just keep it at as low a temperature as possible for as little time as possible, just enough to get that beeswax to melt.
Yeah.
So that it's distributed throughout the oil. This was a friend of mine. She's actually an ICU nurse, and when this was her cat. When she first found the cat, it had a wound that was terribly infected. This was after we had cleaned it a little bit, or she had cleaned it, because I wasn't able to get there initially. So you can see this tissue is very pale. There's a little bit that's more red right here. The tissue is not very happy. It's not getting good circulation. And it's difficult to see in this, but right in here, in this section, was a very deep, like a V-shaped channel. We don't know what the cat did, but this was a very serious, deep wound. I mean, the poor thing almost decapitated himself. So, okay. In this one, you can see a lot more beefy red tissue. You see some little bit of scabbing and stuff there. And this is actually granulation tissue. This is healthy tissue that's beginning to come in. This is after just, I forget how many treatments, but it's just one or two. And she was using the wound powder recipe that I showed you just a minute ago, mixed with honey. She would irrigate it with charcoal water. She would stir charcoal in some water and then pull it up in a syringe and irrigate it to clean the wound out. And then she packed it with that wound powder mixed with honey. You can see the channel a little bit better right there in this picture, but you can see that the wound edges are starting to pull together a little bit. Here you can see that's just the channel that's left unhealed. No signs of infection. This is, I think, what does it say here? 17 days in of treatment. And we were able to treat it only once a day. And some days the cat wouldn't come home. So she wasn't able to, he was a barn cat, so.
Wow. So how in the world did you treat something like that? What did you use?
Well, again, I had her mix up charcoal slurry water. She took some charcoal, like maybe a couple tablespoons of charcoal and a glass of water. She drew that up into a syringe. That was a very tame cat. He was very cooperative. So she would irrigate it, and then she would mix the wound powder that I showed you with honey and pack it in there. And anyway, that's this is 22 days in with only herbal remedies. There's no signs of infection. She had no vet bill, and this sealed up nicely, and the cat is fine today.
Wow. It's amazing. God has given us all of these herbs in our gardens and around us, and we can heal ourselves, but we can also heal our animals. Isn't that wonderful?
Yes, it is. In fact, we have an old horse here on the farm, my mother's farm, that has, they call it heaves. He has respiratory problems, particularly in the heat. And I've been experimenting with Brigham tea. Some people call it Mormon tea. It's not really, really hot here yet, but it seems like it really helps, that she's breathing better. She's not struggling with her air. So yes, I praise the Lord for the gift of herbs.
Yeah. So. Danna, look, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on Hub Chat Health today. And wow, I've learned so much, and I know that our viewers have as well. And I look forward to you coming back on Hub Chat again very soon. And maybe your husband will be coming on as well.
Yes, we'll make arrangements for that.
Fabulous. And in upcoming sessions, we will cover other health topics. So if you have any questions or any comments or anything that you want to know, please get in contact with us. Send your questions through to hubchatquestions@gmail.com. So there it is there on the screen, hubchatquestions@gmail.com. And I was wondering, to finish our session today, Danna, would you pray for us?
I would be happy to.
Thank you.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much, Lord, for these opportunities that we can connect together from across the world with our brothers and sisters and share and learn together and learn from one another. I just pray that you would be with each of us, help us to learn, help us to embrace the things that you've put for us for our healing in nature. We thank you so much for your goodness to us, Father. In Jesus' name, amen.